She didn't see the cart until she was already falling. The impact split the silence of the emergency corridor like a gunshot, metal shrieking against tile, IV bags bursting across the floor, and Emma Whitmore going down hard on one knee with a crash that made 3 nurses flinch and look away just as fast. Blood from a split knuckle smeared across the white linoleum. Nobody moved to help. Victor Kane stood at the end of the hallway with his arms crossed, watching, and the smile that crossed his face wasn't the kind anyone would mistake for sympathy. "Careful, Whitmore," he said. "Wouldn't want you damaging hospital property on your way out." She wasn't on her way out yet, but she would be in less than 40 minutes. And none of them, not Victor, not the senior staff standing behind him like a row of expensive suits, not the orderly who stepped over her without breaking stride, none of them had any idea what was already moving through the streets toward them. Unmarked, silent, purposeful. The convoy drove with its lights off. If you've stayed with me this far, I need you to stay until the end, because this story goes places nobody saw coming. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Silvercrest Medical Center sat at the edge of Ravenport like something the city had tried to forget and failed. 12 floors of glass and institutional beige, a trauma center that handled overflow from 3 counties, chronically understaffed, perpetually under renovation, and for the past 18 months, governed by Victor Kane with the specific energy of a man who had confused administrative authority with actual competence. He wore his lanyard like a medal. He scheduled meetings about meetings. And he had, in Emma Whitmore's estimation, the diagnostic instincts of a parking attendant. She had never said that out loud. She'd thought about it approximately 400 times. Emma was 29, 5 years out of nursing school, and had been working the Silvercrest emergency ward long enough to know which vending machine stole quarters and which attending physician would panic if a patient so much as hiccuped. She was not, by anyone's measure, the kind of person who drew attention to herself. She kept her dark hair pulled back, kept her head down, kept her documentation current to the minute. She was quiet in the way that people mistake for timidity until they actually need something and realize she's already 3 steps ahead of them. The problem, and it was a real one, was that she couldn't stay quiet when it mattered. 3 days ago, she had flagged a concern to the charge nurse about a supply delivery, specifically the surgical-grade oxygen regulators that had come in from a new vendor, Halcyon Med Supply, that Silvercrest had switched to 6 weeks prior. 2 of the regulators in the shipment showed variance in their pressure gauges that fell outside the acceptable tolerance range. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing that made a supply room buzz with alarm. It was a quiet number on a calibration sheet that most people would have shrugged at and moved on. Emma had not moved on. She had written it up, flagged it in the system, and then, when nothing happened, walked it directly to the charge nurse, Donna Pratt, who had looked at the paperwork with the expression of someone being handed a parking ticket for a car they didn't own. "I'll pass it along," Donna had said. Emma had followed up twice. Both times, she was told it was being reviewed. On the 3rd follow-up, she had the bad judgment to put it in an email, specifically to the department head, Dr. Franklin Osei, copying Victor Kane's office because the regulators were part of a broader procurement initiative that Kane had personally championed. That had been her mistake, not factually, not procedurally, but politically, in the way that hospitals run by men like Victor Kane operated on politics more than protocol. It had been a catastrophic miscalculation. Victor had called her into his office at 7:15 that morning, before the shift properly began, while the ward was still in that specific early quiet that exists right before everything breaks open. His office smelled like coffee and printer toner and something faintly synthetic that Emma had never been able to identify. A potted succulent on the windowsill that looked like it was losing the will to live. Framed certificates on every wall, arranged with the kind of deliberateness that signaled their owner thought about them. "Close the door," Victor said without looking up. She closed it. He let her stand for a moment. Not long, maybe 10 seconds, but the kind of 10 seconds that are specifically designed to communicate that your time is worth less than someone else's, before he set down his pen and looked at her. Victor Kane was 51, broad across the shoulders. With silver hair he wore just long enough to suggest he'd made a lifestyle choice about it. He had the smooth, carefully maintained face of someone who had never been wrong in his own memory of events. He smiled at Emma now, with the particular warmth of a man who had already decided what was going to happen. "Emma," he said, "do you know how many nurses we have on staff in this department?" 43 full-time, she said, plus 17 part-time and 6 agency staff. That wasn't the answer he was looking for. He adjusted. 66 people, he said, and you're the only one who decided to send an email to my office about calibration variants on oxygen regulators. He paused. Do you know what that tells me? That the other 65 didn't read the technical sheet. That you don't understand how this institution functions. He leaned back. I've had 3 calls this week from Halcyon. 3. Because a nurse in my ER decided to go around her supervisor and cast doubt on a vendor relationship that took 14 months to negotiate. Do you have any idea what that negotiation was worth to this hospital? I have an idea what a failed regulator is worth to a patient. Silence. The regulators, Victor said carefully, have been reviewed by procurement. They are within acceptable parameters. By whose standard? Because the manufacturers publish tolerance, us, Emma. He said her name like a period at the end of a sentence. This conversation is over. What I want to talk about is your pattern of behavior. This isn't the first time you've inserted yourself into decisions above your pay grade. He opened a folder on his desk. In March, you flagged a medication interaction that Dr. Osei had already cleared. In September, you filed a formal concern about triage protocols that was determined to be without merit. Now this. He closed the folder. I've been patient. I think you're a nurse who cares deeply about patients. I also think you're a nurse who has significant difficulty understanding her role. Emma's hands were still at her sides. My role is patient safety. Your role, Victor said, standing now, which was a clear signal, is to execute the care plans ordered by the physician supervising you. That's it. That's the whole job. He straightened his jacket. I'm going to need your badge and your access card. Effective today, your position at Silvercrest is being terminated. HR will process the paperwork. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal items. She stood there for 2 seconds, maybe 3. The regulators are not your concern anymore. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Karen, can you ask security to come to my office? We're doing an accompanied exit. The thing about being escorted out of a place you've worked for 5 years is that it happens in front of everyone. That's not incidental, it's architectural. A security guard walking someone through an emergency ward at 8 in the morning, past the nurse's station, and the supply room and the break room where 3 of your colleagues are eating breakfast, communicates exactly what it's supposed to communicate. It says, this person is no longer one of you. It says, look, and then go back to work. It says, this is what happens. Emma carried a canvas tote and a plant she'd kept on her locker shelf for 2 years. The plant was a pothos with 2 long trailing vines, and she held it against her chest like she was trying to keep it warm. She didn't look at anyone, or she tried not to. Her eyes went sideways once, involuntarily, and she caught Donna Pratt at the nurse's station, watching. Donna looked away first. The security guard, a heavy-set man named Roy, who had always been decent to her, said quietly as they reached the lobby, I'm sorry about this. For what it's worth. It's worth something, Emma said. She pushed through the front doors, and the September air hit her, cool and damp with the specific quality of a morning that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. She stood on the sidewalk. The plant hung from one hand. The tote bag hung from the other. Her car was in the east lot, which meant walking around the side of the building, past the ambulance bay and the loading dock, and she started moving in that direction because standing still in front of the entrance felt worse. She had made it about 40 yards, past the first ambulance bay, past the bench where family members sat waiting for news of people they loved, when she heard it. She stopped. The sound was wrong. Not wrong like an alarm, not wrong like a crash. Wrong like something that didn't belong in the specific acoustic landscape of a hospital campus on a Tuesday morning in Ravenport. She'd heard it before in very different contexts. The particular low-frequency drone, blended with a rotary percussion she felt in her sternum before her ears fully processed it, and her body responded before her brain gave it permission. She turned. The helicopter was already descending. It was coming in low and fast over the parking structure from the north, matte dark, no commercial markings, and it dropped toward the hospital's rear helipad with the deliberate efficiency of something that had done this before and didn't need to announce itself. At the same moment, she heard the convoy. 3 vehicles. Black. No plates she could read from this distance. They turned off the main road and moved through the hospital's service entrance with the kind of certainty that told her they already knew exactly where they were going. No hesitation at the gate. No waiting for a security check. Emma stood on the sidewalk with her plant and her tote bag, and she watched, and something tightened at the base of her skull, the way it only did when a situation was about to become significantly worse than it currently appeared. She pulled out her phone and checked the time. 8:23 a.m. Her car was 40 yards away. She could keep walking. She didn't walk. Inside Silvercrest Medical Center, the morning had settled into its usual rhythm, which was to say it was barely contained chaos wearing the costume of organization. The ER had 3 patients waiting on imaging, 1 post-op recovery that should have moved to a floor bed 6 hours ago but hadn't because the floor beds were full, and a 4-year-old with a suspected arm fracture who had been crying at a pitch that was beginning to unsettle even the staff who had been pediatric adjacent for years. Dr. Franklin Osei was 44, Silvercrest's ER department head, a tall man with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead and the slightly distracted quality of someone processing 4 conversations simultaneously. He was good, genuinely good, technically, and he had the specific weakness of genuinely good doctors who work under bad administrators. He had learned to pick his battles, and he had lost the ability to recognize which battles were worth picking. He had seen the email Emma sent. He had read it twice. He had not forwarded it anywhere. He was at the central station reviewing a chart when Donna came to find him. "Victor terminated Whitmore this morning," Donna said. Osei didn't look up from the chart. "I heard." She was right about those regulators. The procurement review, Franklin. Donna rarely used his first name. He looked up. Her expression was the one she made when she was genuinely worried rather than administratively concerned. She wasn't wrong. I pulled the spec sheet myself after she flagged it. The variance is real. Osei set down the chart. He picked it back up. He set it down again. "I'll look at it," he said. "When?" "Donna?" "She's already gone." Victor had security walk her out. Osei removed his glasses from his forehead and cleaned them with the hem of his coat, which was something he did when he needed a moment to decide something. He put them back. "After rounds," he said. Donna looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at someone when you want to say you know that's not good enough, but you've had this particular version of this particular conversation enough times that you already know how it ends. Then she turned and went back to the station. The 4-year-old with the fractured arm had stopped crying, which was briefly a relief until the triage nurse noticed it was because the child had simply exhausted herself and fallen asleep in the chair. Emma was still standing outside when the first ambulance came in fast. Not unusual. Ambulances came in fast. But this one had its lights and siren running in a pattern she didn't immediately recognize, and behind it there was a second, and then a third, and then a fourth. And that was unusual. That was the kind of pattern that meant something specific had happened somewhere not far from here. She started moving toward the ambulance bay before she registered that she'd made the decision. She stopped herself. She was no longer a Silvercrest employee. She was standing on a public sidewalk with a pothos plant. She had no access card, no badge, no authority, no role. Whatever was coming through those doors was not her problem to solve. She stood exactly where she was and watched. The first gurney came out of the ambulance at speed, the paramedic rattling through a report. Multiple GSW, upper torso, systolic 80 over palp, 2 large bore IVs, 1 unit O negative wide open. And the words were so familiar she was mouthing them before she caught herself. The second gurney. Third. A civilian, not a patient, following behind the third ambulance in the state of dissociation that preceded the realization that something terrible had happened. A woman in a gray blazer with blood on the sleeve that wasn't hers. Emma's count was at 7 casualties in 4 minutes, which was not a mass casualty situation yet, but was absolutely trending that way, and the ER they were rolling into was already at 80% capacity. She was on the sidewalk. She made herself stay there. A 5th ambulance turned into the bay, and this one had an escort. Two vehicles, unmarked, moving in formation, and the men who came out of those vehicles when they stopped were wearing clothes that were not uniforms, but moved like uniforms. They moved like people who had trained to move through space efficiently. One of them went straight to the ambulance doors before the paramedics had them open. Emma knew that posture. She knew it the way you know the smell of something that was once very ordinary to you and has since become the smell of a specific kind of memory. She started walking toward the bay. She told herself she wasn't going inside. She told herself she was going to her car, which was in this direction anyway. She was simply walking in the direction of her car. The fifth gurney came out with two men running alongside it, not paramedics, and one of them was speaking into a radio clipped at his shoulder, voice too low to catch. On the gurney was a man in his 50s, dressed in civilian clothes that had been partially cut away. Severe trauma, visible even from 12 feet. The kind of injury pattern that came from high-energy impact with something that did not yield. She knew, without being able to explain how she knew, that this man mattered. Not the way a doctor assessed a patient's chance of survival, the way you recognized that a situation had a center of gravity, and this was it. One of the men running alongside the gurney looked up as they moved toward the doors, and his eyes passed over the small crowd that had gathered at the edge of the ambulance bay. Hospital staff, a few civilians, two security personnel. And then his eyes came back to Emma. Something crossed his face that she didn't have time to identify before they were through the doors and gone. She was 12 feet from the ambulance bay entrance. She stopped. Behind her, the helicopter that had landed 40 minutes ago was still on the pad. She could see it over the roof of the parking structure. Rotor stopped now. Someone standing beside it. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. An unknown number with a local prefix. She answered because she almost always answered, a habit from years of being on call. "Is this Emma Whitmore?" A woman's voice, crisp, professional. "Yes." "This is Colonel Sarah Dre, attached to the Joint Operational Medical Unit out of Fort Keene. We have a situation developing at your current location, and I need to confirm that you are the Emma Whitmore, formerly of the 4th Combat Support Hospital, attached to Vanguard Special Operations Group, Kandahar Rotation, 2018 through 2020. Emma's hand tightened on the phone. "I'm no longer employed at Silvercrest," she said, because it was the first thing that came out of her mouth, and it was the most immediately relevant truth she had. "I'm aware," the colonel said. "That's actually part of why I'm calling. Can you see the parking structure from where you're standing?" Emma turned. "Yes?" "East stairwell, 3rd level. Someone would like to speak with you in person. Right now." The line went quiet but didn't drop. Emma looked at the phone, then at the parking structure, then at the hospital doors, then at her plant, which she set very carefully on the sidewalk bench beside a sleeping woman in a visitor's badge. She walked to the parking structure. What? The 3rd level of the east stairwell smelled like concrete and exhaust, and it was empty except for two people standing near the stairwell door. A woman in civilian clothes who carried herself with the specific physical authority of someone accustomed to being the most competent person in most rooms, and a man Emma recognized. She stopped walking. "You're taller than your file photo," said the man. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 46 years old, and the last time Emma had seen him, he had been bleeding from a through-and-through in the left shoulder in a forward operating base, in a province that the official record didn't have his team anywhere near. She had packed that wound with her bare hands in a space roughly the size of a broom closet, while someone she couldn't see kept shooting at the wall outside. She had kept him alive for 6 hours until extraction. He had walked to the helicopter under his own power. "Marcus," she said. "It's Captain Webb now, technically, but given the circumstances, you can go ahead and skip it." He looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you've thought about them in a specific context for a while. "You look like you're having a rough morning." "I was fired 2 hours ago." "I know. That's actually why we're here." He glanced at the woman beside him who stepped forward. "I'm Colonel Dre," she said. Short version. The man they brought in on that last ambulance is Deputy Director Harold Sims, Federal Bureau of Operational Security. He was traveling through Ravenport for a classified transit when his convoy was hit. He has a traumatic injury pattern consistent with blast and shrapnel exposure. She paused. "He's currently being triaged in your emergency department by staff who have no experience with this kind of injury." Emma processed this. What kind of blast? Improvised? Low grade? Military perspective? High grade in a civilian context? Dre's voice stayed level. He has 3 hours, maybe 4, before systemic complications become incompatible with survival. We have a trauma surgeon from Fort Keene in the air right now, but she's 2 hours and 20 minutes out. A beat. I've had 3 people on the phone with the ER down there in the last 15 minutes. I've been informed they don't have staff with the right experience to manage this specific injury pattern through stabilization. I've been terminated. You have, Dre said. You also have the most relevant experience of anyone within a 140-mile radius for exactly this injury set. We've already been in contact with the hospital board's emergency contact. They're aware of the request. Emma thought about Victor, about the escort through the lobby, about the look on Donna's face. Does Kane know? She asked. Marcus Webb almost smiled. Kane is about to have a very different kind of problem, he said. But yeah, he knows a request has been made. He's deciding whether to honor it. Emma stood in the parking structure's third-floor stairwell and considered the distance between where she was and where that man on the gurney was, and what the distance was going to cost someone if she got in her car and drove home. What's the injury pattern? She said. Dre handed her a phone with a preliminary field assessment on the screen. Emma read it. Her mouth tightened at the second item on the list. He's got fragment retention in the upper right thoracic cavity, and they've been treating it as standard penetrating trauma. Yes. That's not... She stopped, handed the phone back. Who's the attending? Dr. Osei. He's good. He just hasn't seen this. She pressed 2 fingers against her own sternum, an unconscious habit from the field, a gesture she made when she was calculating. Okay, I need to talk to Osei directly before I go back in there. And I need it on record that the re-entry is at the request of the military medical unit, not Silvercrest administration. Already drafted, Dre said, and held out a second sheet. Emma took it, read the top 2 paragraphs, signed at the bottom with the pen Dre was already holding out. Marcus Webb watched this with an expression she couldn't quite read, somewhere between respect and something quieter than that. One more thing, Emma said, folding the paper. The oxygen regulators in Bay 3 and Bay 4. Don't let anyone use them. Dre frowned. Why? Because they're off-spec, and I flagged it 3 days ago, and nobody listened. She tucked the paper into her tote bag. And if someone's in the middle of a thoracic procedure and the oxygen delivery pressure fluctuates, it's going to be a very bad day. A silence settled over the concrete stairwell. I'll have someone pull them, Dre said. Do it now, Emma said. Not in 5 minutes. She went down the stairs without waiting for a response, and when she pushed through the door at the bottom and stepped back out into the September morning, she walked toward the hospital entrance with her hands empty. She'd left the plant on the bench, and her badge was gone and her access card was gone, and in about 30 seconds she was going to walk up to a set of doors she'd been escorted out of 2 hours ago. Her knuckle was still split from the cart. She pressed her thumb against it as she walked. The hospital doors slid open. Roy, the security guard, was at the desk. He looked up and saw her. Something moved across his face. Miss Whitmore, he said carefully. I need to get to Bay 1, she said. I have authorization. She held up the paper. Roy looked at it, looked at her, looked past her, where, if he had a direct line of sight to the east lot, he might have seen the unmarked vehicles that were still parked precisely where they had stopped. Mr. Kane, he started, is going to be a problem, Emma said, but Deputy Director Sims is going to be a bigger one if I don't get through that door in the next 45 seconds. Roy picked up the desk phone, called someone, said 3 words she couldn't hear, waited, nodded. He pressed the button that opened the door to the ER. She went through. The first thing she registered was the volume. The ER had shifted into the particular register of controlled emergency, multiple simultaneous conversations, the rhythmic punctuation of monitors and ventilators, the kind of organized noise that distinguished a functional trauma response from chaos. The second thing she registered was Osei at the far end of Bay 1, and even from across the room she could see in the set of his shoulders that he was working a problem he wasn't sure how to solve. The third thing she registered was Victor Kane, standing at the edge of the bay with his arms crossed, watching her walk in. His face cycled through three things in less than 2 seconds: recognition, anger, and then, when he looked past her and saw the two men in civilian clothing who had followed her through the door and taken up positions near the entrance, the way people stand when they are not hospital visitors. Something that wasn't quite fear, but was its immediate neighbor. Emma looked at him for exactly as long as it took to establish that she had seen him. Then she looked away and walked to Osei. "Franklin?" she said. He turned. The relief on his face was genuine and immediate, and for a man who hadn't returned her calls about the regulators, who had said after rounds when Donna told him she'd been let go, it was more complicated than simple gratitude. "Emma," his voice dropped. "I don't know what's on that CT, and I need someone who does." She pulled on a pair of gloves from the dispenser at the station beside her, snapped them onto her hands, and said, "Show me." Behind her, she heard Victor Kane say something to someone. She didn't turn around. She was already in. The CT was up on the secondary monitor in Bay 1, and Emma stood in front of it for 11 seconds without saying anything, which was 11 seconds longer than Osei wanted to wait. "Talk to me," he said. "He's got fragment retention in the right upper lobe, but it's not where you think it is." She pointed without touching the screen. "See this opacity here? You're probably reading that as post-blast edema. It's not. That's a secondary fragment that migrated. It's sitting 3 millimeters from the pulmonary artery." She paused. "If anyone's been moving him aggressively..." "We had to reposition him twice for imaging." Emma closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "Okay." She opened them. "Has he been on positive pressure ventilation?" We were about to intubate. "Don't!" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Not yet. Positive pressure will shift that fragment. You intubate him before you've got that stabilized, and you'll nick the artery, and he'll be gone in under 4 minutes. She turned from the screen. "Where's your best interventional radiologist?" Osei's hesitation told her everything. "He's in surgery," Osei said. "Upper floor. Scheduled case. We're trying to pull him, but..." "How long?" 20 minutes? Maybe 30. "Get him on comms now. I'll walk him through what I'm seeing." She was already moving toward the patient bay, pulling aside the curtain. "And I need imaging from the second scan angle. What you have here is incomplete." Deputy Director Harold Sims was 53 years old and looked, at this moment, about 70. He was conscious, which was both good and complicated. Conscious meant his blood pressure was holding, but it also meant he was aware enough to be frightened, and frightened patients moved, and movement was the specific thing that could kill him in the next 60 seconds if the wrong person handled him without knowing what they were dealing with. He looked at Emma when she came through the curtain. His eyes were sharp despite everything. "You're not the same doctor," he said. His voice was rough, constricted. "No," Emma said. "I'm not a doctor." She checked his pulse at the wrist, manual, direct, the way she'd done it in places where the monitor leads had been eaten by weather or worse. Steady, but elevated. "I'm the person who's going to keep you alive until the surgeon gets here." She looked directly at him. "Do you understand what I need from you?" "What?" "Don't move. Whatever you feel like doing, don't do it. Don't shift your weight. Don't reach for anything. Don't cough if you can help it." She held his gaze. "Nod if you understand." He nodded, slow and deliberate. "Good." She straightened and turned to the nurse at the monitor station, a young man named Theo who had been at Silver Crest less than a year and was currently maintaining the expression of someone trying not to look as out of his depth as he felt. "I need you to manually document every vital every 90 seconds, not the automated reading, manually. Write it down." Yes. "Okay. If his systolic drops below 80, tell me before you do anything else. Not after. Before." Theo nodded and picked up a pen. Emma came back out of the bay and nearly walked into Victor Kane. He had moved from his position near the entrance, which she had tracked peripherally, and he was now standing 3 feet from Bay 1's curtain with his arms still crossed and his face arranged in the expression of a man who was working very hard to appear in control of a situation that was operating entirely without his consent. "You don't have staff privileges here," he said, quietly, which was almost worse than loudly. I have a signed authorization from Colonel Sarah Dre, Joint Operational Medical Unit. She didn't stop moving. It supersedes your employment decision in the context of a federal medical emergency. Your legal team can fight that out later. Emma. He reached out and put his hand on her arm. She stopped. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with authority or paperwork. It was just a look. But it was the kind of look that a person gives when they are done pretending to weigh their words, when they have run out of the specific patience required to manage someone who mistakes their position for their judgment. Victor let go of her arm. "This isn't over," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's really not." She walked past him to find a working phone line. Bokat. Dr. Raymond Fisk, Silvercrest interventional radiologist, had the voice of someone who had been pulled out of a procedure he didn't want to leave, which he had. He was 58, technically excellent, and he communicated irritation through a specific kind of clipped precision that Emma had learned to work with in the first 40 seconds of talking to people like him. "Walk me through the second angle," he said. She did. She described the fragment position, the proximity to the vessel, the lung field compression on the lateral view. She used the specific language, not clinical softened for civilian ears, the real language, the language from the field protocol manuals she'd read in a forward operating base common room at 2 a.m. while someone she'd never met before slept on the cot 6 feet away. Fisk went quiet for a moment. "That's not standard trauma presentation," he said. "No, it's blast pattern with secondary migration. Different trajectory, different behavior. The initial fragment did the visible damage. The secondary is the one that'll kill him." Another pause. "How long have you been doing trauma?" "Long enough." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now." She had the CT images pulled on the portable display beside her. "Can you talk me through temporary stabilization protocol while you finish up and get down here?" He could. He did. They worked through it on the phone, a conversation that lasted 11 minutes and involved 3 disagreements, 2 of which Emma won, and 1 of which she conceded because Fisk was right and she was working with incomplete information and she knew it. The concession surprised him. She could hear it in the brief pause before he adjusted his recommendation. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Nobody is," Emma said. "How much longer?" 15 minutes. 12, she said. "Please." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so compressed. 12? She hung up and turned back to the bay. The ER had shifted in the 20 minutes she'd been working. The mass casualty intake had stabilized at 11 patients. 9 from the convoy incident, 2 peripheral cases that had come in separate and gotten caught in the same net. 2 had already been moved to surgery. The remaining 9 were distributed across the bays, and the staff was managing, but managing in the way a person manages when they're holding something heavy and their arms have started to shake. Ose was at the central station running triage updates. His attending, Dr. Priya Nath, was in Bay 3 with a chest wound that was eating her time. 2 of the agency nurses had been pulled to Bay 5 for a patient in early decompensation. That left Theo and a second nurse named Carla handling the Sims Bay, plus Emma. And then there was Victor. He had retreated to the hallway just outside the ER proper, but he hadn't left. She could see him through the glass partition, on his phone, pacing, the specific pacing of a man who was making calls he hoped would resolve a situation that was actively beyond his capacity to resolve. She had seen that kind of pacing before, usually right before something got significantly worse. Ose found her at the imaging station at the 40-minute mark. "Fisk is scrubbing out," he said. "He'll be here in 8. Good. She had been reviewing the updated lateral scan, which had come back with the second angle she'd requested. It confirmed what she'd suspected and added one thing she hadn't fully accounted for. She moved her finger along the screen. "There's a third fragment, smaller, here." She tapped the image. "It's not immediately critical, but it complicates the approach." Ose studied the scan. He was quiet for a moment. "How did you know to look for migration?" "Because I've seen this pattern before." He nodded slowly, then quieter. "Emma, the regulators, I should have—" "Later," she said. Not harshly, but but with the clarity of someone who knows which problems belong in which hour. Right now, I need you to clear the approach path for when Fisk gets here. Minimum personnel in that bay. Okay. And I need you to know something. She turned from the screen. Sims is going to be responsive, and he's going to want to know who's in charge of his care. The men who came in with him are going to want the same information. She met his eyes. You're the attending. Whatever happens in this room, that's on your license. I'm supporting. You call it. Something shifted in Osei's face. It wasn't quite shame, and it wasn't quite relief, and it was honest in a way that she appreciated. Yeah, he said. Okay. She turned back to the scan. Across the room, she heard a door open and the sound of military boots on linoleum. A distinctive sound, different from standard-issue shoes, something about the sole weight and the stride cadence, and she knew without looking that the situation in the hallway had just changed. The man who came through the ER doors was not Marcus Webb. He was broader, older, and wore the particular expression of someone who was used to walking into rooms and having those rooms immediately reorganize around him. He had a silver eagle on his collar that identified him as a full colonel, and he had 3 people behind him moving with the coordinated efficiency of people who had done this specific exercise in different countries under considerably more difficult conditions. His name was Colonel Dale Rutherford, and he went directly to Victor Kane. She watched from the imaging station as the conversation happened. She couldn't hear it. The ER noise was too continuous. But she could read body language with the fluency of someone who had spent 2 years in environments where reading body language was not an interpersonal skill, but a survival one. Victor was talking too much. His hands came up twice. His shoulders were doing the things shoulders do when a person is simultaneously trying to appear authoritative and feeling the ground move under their feet. Rutherford was still. His people were still. That stillness, when the other person was moving, was not calm. It was the specific stillness of someone who doesn't need to perform certainty because they actually have it. Rutherford said something short. Victor responded. Rutherford said something shorter. Victor stopped responding. Then Rutherford looked across the ER and found Emma at the imaging station, and he started walking toward her. Victor watched him go with the expression of a man who had just realized the walls of the room were closer together than they had been 20 minutes ago. Rutherford stopped at the station. Whitmore. Colonel. Status. Interventional radiologist arrives in 6 minutes. Fragment position is stable for now. Patient is conscious, cooperative, vitals holding. She handed him the tablet with the current readings. He needs a sterile procedure room cleared and prepped. Bay 1 is too exposed. Rutherford looked at the tablet for 4 seconds, handed it back. What else? It wasn't a question. The ER is at capacity. 11 patients from the incident, 2 additional cases. Staff is stretched. Your people... She glanced at the 3 behind him. Any of them have trauma support background? 2 do. I'd like to use them. Rutherford turned slightly. Garza Pack, you're with Whitmore. Whatever she needs. The 2 who stepped forward were a woman and a man, both in their early 30s with the compact economical physicality of people who operated outdoors in complicated terrain. The woman, Garza, nodded at Emma with a professionalism that felt genuine. What do you need? Garza said. You know sterile field protocol? Field standard. Good enough. Bay 2 is empty. Let's get it prepped. She started moving. Pack, I need you at the central station coordinating supply requests. The charge nurse is Donna Pratt. She runs this room. You support her. You don't direct her. Clear? Pack said, Clear, without hesitation. She looked back at Rutherford. Anything else I should know about the patient's condition that wasn't in the field assessment? Rutherford's jaw shifted slightly. He had a cardiac event in the vehicle before extraction. 12 seconds, self-resolving. Not in the field report because it happened after the report was filed. Emma absorbed this. The cardiac event changed her assessment of the 3rd fragment in a way that wasn't good. Was it documented anywhere? By me, verbally. I need you to tell Fisk that the moment he arrives, before he looks at anything else. She met Rutherford's eyes. Don't let it slip into the background noise. Understood. A pause. You're very direct. I'm pressed for time. She went to prep bay 2. Fisk arrived in 11 minutes, not 8, which she forgave him for because he came in hot, still pulling on his second glove, already reviewing the tablet someone handed him before he fully cleared the doorway. He was shorter than his voice suggested, with the blunt-featured face of a man who'd never cared much about making an impression and the hands of someone who'd spent 30 years being precise with them. He looked at the scan on the portable display before he looked at Emma. "You moved him?" he asked. "No. I told the staff not to move him, and he hasn't been." "Good." He scanned further. "The third fragment. I know. Rutherford has information about a cardiac event in transit. Talk to him before you go in." Fisk's head came up. "That changes the approach." "Yes." They looked at each other for a moment. 12 minutes, he said. "You said 12. I know." "You made it 11. He wasn't smiling, not exactly, but something in the set of his face shifted. "Okay, show me the bay." She showed him the bay. The procedure took 44 minutes. Emma stood outside the curtain for the first 20, coordinating the parallel management of the other 9 patients with Garza and the Silvercrest staff. At the 20-minute mark, Fisk asked for her through the curtain by name, not by title, which made Theo look up from his documentation with a slightly startled expression. She went in. She stayed in for the next 24 minutes and didn't come back out until it was done. What happened inside that bay was not dramatic in the visual sense. There was no soundtrack, no single decisive moment that would register as a turning point to anyone watching from outside. It was technical and concentrated and required the specific combination of Fisk's precision and Emma's knowledge of the blast pattern that she'd built over 2 years working trauma in environments that Fisk had only read about. They disagreed once, mid-procedure. Emma was right. Fisk adjusted without comment. When they came out, Sims was stable. Not good. Stable is not good. Stable is a platform you stand on while you figure out the next step. But his vitals were holding and the fragment had been immobilized and the cardiac risk had been significantly reduced, and he was alive in a way that he had not been guaranteed to be alive 45 minutes ago. Fisk stripped his gloves outside the curtain and looked at Emma with an expression that was doing several things at once. "Where did you train?" he said. "Field," she said. "Before that?" "State nursing program. Standard." He shook his head slightly, not in disbelief, but in the way a person shakes their head when they're revising a category they'd put someone in. "You saved his life," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I could not have managed that fragment migration without the positional information you had. I would have gone in wrong, and we would have lost him." Emma pulled her own gloves off. "You would have figured it out." "Maybe. After about 3 minutes we didn't have." He dropped his gloves in the waste bin. "Who terminated you this morning?" She blinked. "Word travels?" "Rutherford briefed me." Fisk's voice was flat. "Who terminated you?" "Victor Kane, Chief Administrator." He looked toward the ER entrance, where Victor had apparently relocated at some point in the past 40 minutes and was now standing near the administrative corridor entrance, still on his phone. "I see." "It's a personnel matter," Emma said. "It was," Fisk said. "I'm less sure it's just that now." He picked up a chart from the station and started reviewing it. "I'm going to need to document everything about the last 44 minutes, in detail, for the incident record." "Of course." "And I'm going to need your clinical observations on the fragment migration, in writing, before the end of today." "I can do that." "Good." He was already reviewing the chart. "Get some water. You look like you've been awake since 4. She had been awake since 4. She found a cup and filled it at the staff sink in the supply alcove and drank it standing up, looking at the wall, and gave herself exactly 60 seconds to be somewhere other than in the middle of all of this. The wall had a laminated emergency protocol poster that she had probably read 50 times in 5 years and could no longer actually see as text. 60 seconds. She put the cup down and went back out. What she walked back into was not what she had left. The ER had reorganized in the time she'd been in Bay 2, and not in a way that was purely medical. Rutherford was at the central station with Donna Pratt, and from the body language they were deep into something specific. Two of his support personnel, not Garza and Pack, two others who had come in while Emma was in the bay, were at the administrative terminal with an access card that was not a Silvercrest card. Donna saw Emma come out and crossed to her in a way that was efficient and slightly urgent. "What's happening?" Emma said quietly. "Rutherford's team pulled the procurement records," Donna said. Her voice was very low. "The oxygen regulators, the whole Halcyon Med Supply file." A beat. "Emma, there are 3 months of back and forth on those regulators that wasn't in the public system. There's a secondary file. Victor's name is on the sign-off." Emma was still. "On the sign-off for what exactly?" "For a variance waiver. Someone requested a waiver on the calibration standard for the new regulators. 6 weeks ago." Donna's eyes were doing something complicated. "It was flagged for review by the equipment safety coordinator. Victor signed off on bypassing the review." The supply alcove was still behind Emma. The ward was still in front of her. The laminated poster was still on the wall. "Does Rutherford know?" Emma asked. "He's reading it right now." Emma looked toward the central station. Rutherford was very still in the same way he'd been still when he spoke to Victor. The stillness of certainty, not composure. He had a paper in his hand and he was reading it without moving any other part of his body. Then he looked up and met Emma's eyes across the room. And then he looked past her, toward the administrative corridor entrance where Victor Kane had been standing. Victor was no longer there. Rutherford said something to the man beside him without looking away from the space where Victor had been. The man moved immediately toward the corridor entrance. Emma turned. The door to the administrative corridor was swinging shut on its pneumatic hinge. Slowly, like something had just passed through it. Donna made a small sound beside her. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Unknown number, different from Dre's earlier call. She answered. "Whitmore," Marcus Webb's voice, clipped now, the professional register he used when things were moving fast. "We have a problem." "Tell me." Kane just accessed the hospital's central server room. His badge logged entry 40 seconds ago. A pause. "The server room has the procurement records, the incident documentation from today, and the employee complaint files." Emma understood immediately. Not data theft. Deletion. The kind of deletion you attempt when you're watching the room close around you, and you're still trying to decide whether there's a door you haven't tried. "How long does he have before someone stops him?" she said. "Rutherford's guy is at the corridor now, but the server room is on the other end of the building." "How long?" she repeated. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. She looked at Donna. "The server room," Emma said. "Is there a secondary backup system? Offline, physical backup?" Donna's face went through 3 expressions in 1 second. "There's a weekly tape backup. It runs every Sunday. If he's deleting from the primary server, then the last full backup was 5 days ago." Emma ran the math. Everything from the last 5 days, the variance waiver, the flag responses, the emails I sent, would all be gone, Donna said. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. The monitors beeped their rhythmic reports. 11 patients, 9 from the convoy. The man in Bay 2 who was alive because of a fragment assessment made by a nurse who had been escorted out of this building less than 3 hours ago. Emma looked at the door to the administrative corridor. "There's another way into the server room," Donna said. It wasn't a question. She was looking at the same door. "Through the maintenance hall," Emma said. "Past the equipment storage." "That's a longer route." "Not if you know which doors are propped." Donna stared at her. "How do you know which doors are propped?" "Because I worked here for 5 years, and I've run to every corner of this building in the middle of the night, and I know how the night shift keeps their shortcuts." Emma was already moving. "Call Rutherford and tell him which route I'm taking." "Emma, you don't—" But she was already through the side door and into the maintenance corridor, moving at a pace that was just below a run, because running in a hospital hallway drew attention, and she didn't have time to explain herself to anyone else right now. The maintenance hall was fluorescent lit and smelled like floor cleaner and the particular warmth of electrical infrastructure. She knew the second left turn, she knew the propped door with the broken latch that maintenance had been meaning to fix for 8 months. She knew the length of the corridor because she had walked it on her way to the equipment storage room 36 times when the supply elevator was down. She pushed through the propped door. 20 feet ahead, the server room door was ajar. The way it was ajar only when someone was inside and had come in without the full electronic latch engaging. The way it was ajar when someone was in a hurry and hadn't waited for the mechanism. She put her hand on the door. From inside, she heard the specific clicking sequence of someone navigating a file system at speed, and under it, the quieter sound of breathing that was a little too fast and a little too shallow to belong to someone who was doing something they were comfortable with. She pushed the door open. Victor Kane stood at the server terminal with his back to her, one hand on the keyboard and one hand on the monitor edge. The screen showed a file tree, and it was open on the procurement directory, and the cursor was sitting on a folder she recognized by name because she had referenced it in her flagging emails 3 days ago. He heard her and went still. Then he turned. His face did something she hadn't expected. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't the administrator's mask, and it wasn't the controlled contempt he'd used in his office that morning. It was something rawer than any of those things, and it lasted only a second before he pulled it back. But she saw it. She said nothing. He said nothing. Behind her, she heard boots in the corridor. Victor's eyes moved to the door behind her, and then back to her face, and she watched the calculation happen in real time. The specific calculation of a man assessing whether there is still a version of this moment where he comes out ahead. His hand moved toward the keyboard. "Don't," Emma said. Her voice was very quiet. Not threatening. She had no power to threaten him. She was a terminated nurse with a split knuckle and no badge. It was simply the voice of someone who knew that what happened in the next 2 seconds was going to define the shape of everything that came after. His hand stopped. The boots in the corridor got louder. And Victor Kane, chief administrator of Silvercrest Medical Center, a man who had spent the morning explaining to a nurse that she needed to understand her role, looked at Emma Whitmore with an expression that had no professional name for it, and he stepped back from the terminal. The door behind Emma opened. 2 of Rutherford's people came through it, and on the screen behind Victor, the procurement folder was still there, untouched, the cursor blinking on it like a question waiting for an answer. The 2 men from Rutherford's team moved past Emma into the server room with the economical precision of people who had secured spaces before and knew exactly what that looked like. One went directly to the terminal and inserted a device into the USB port, small, black, the kind of thing that didn't exist in civilian IT catalogs. The other positioned himself between Victor and the door in a way that was not aggressive and did not need to be. Victor didn't resist. He'd already made his calculation, and it had come up empty, and now he was doing the thing that certain kinds of men do when the room runs out of options. He was composing himself, straightening his jacket, reassembling the administrator's face over whatever had been underneath it 30 seconds ago. "I was retrieving records," he said, "for the incident documentation." Neither of Rutherford's men responded. Emma looked at him for a moment. "Victor," she said, "stop." He looked at her. "Just stop," she said. Not unkindly. With the flatness of someone who has run out of the energy required to be angry, she left the server room and walked back through the maintenance corridor, through the propped door, and back into the ER. And she did not look back to see what happened next, because what happened next in that server room was no longer her problem to manage. She had 9 patients and a stabilized federal official and a radiology report she needed to complete before the end of the day, and those things were hers. Rutherford was waiting at the central station. He had the expression of a man who had just received confirmation of something he already knew. "The folder's intact?" Emma asked. "Intact," he said. "We'll pull a forensic image of the full directory before we release the terminal." He paused. He didn't delete anything. He was about to. "I know, that's its own problem." He looked at her steadily. "Whitmore, I need to tell you something." She waited. "The variance waiver he signed," Rutherford said. "It wasn't the first one. We found 2 prior waivers on separate equipment categories going back 14 months, all from Halcyon Med Supply, all signed by Kane, all bypassing the standard safety review." He let that sit for a second. "The procurement arrangement between Silvercrest and Halcyon, we're looking at a financial relationship that goes beyond standard vendor contracting." Emma was quiet for a moment. "How far beyond?" "That's what the next 48 hours are going to tell us, but..." He glanced toward the administrative corridor. The convoy attack today was not random. Director Sims was targeted, and the route he was on was filed with a limited distribution list. He looked back at her. We don't know yet how his route was known. We're working that question. She heard what he wasn't saying. You think the breach originated here? I think we have a procurement relationship with a vendor we're now examining very carefully, a chief administrator who just attempted to access and potentially destroy documentation, and a federal official who was attacked on a route that someone leaked. He paused. I'm not making accusations. I'm telling you why this day has more layers than it appeared to have this morning. Emma pressed 2 fingers against her sternum. The old habit. Does Sims know? He's been briefed at the level his current condition allows. Rutherford's voice was measured. He asked about you specifically. He wanted to know who made the call on the fragment. What did you tell him? The truth. A pause that might have contained something like respect. He said to tell you thank you. She nodded once and went to find something to eat because she hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning, and her hands had developed the faint tremor that came not from nerves but from blood sugar, dropping below the threshold where her body started filing complaints. The break room had a vending machine and a coffee maker and a table with 4 chairs, one of which had a crack in the seat that caught on clothing. Emma sat in one of the other 3 and ate a package of peanut butter crackers and drank coffee that tasted like it had been made 2 hours ago and reheated once, which it had. Garza came in at the 6-minute mark and sat across from her without being invited, which Emma appreciated because it meant she didn't have to perform sociability. The patient in Bay 4 is asking for a specific medication that's not in his chart, Garza said. Theo's not sure how to handle it. What medication? Lorazepam. He says it was prescribed before the convoy. Is he showing anxiety symptoms, or is he asking because he's in the habit of asking? Garza considered this. The second one. Tell Theo to document the request and contact the prescribing physician before he does anything. Standard protocol. Don't administer without confirmation. Emma ate another cracker. Has anyone from Silver Crest Administration been in the ER in the last hour? One person, a woman, introduced herself as the deputy administrator, Greta Langford. She stayed for about 4 minutes and left. Emma thought about what Greta Langford's 4-minute visit meant. Greta was cautious, procedurally competent, and had spent the better part of 18 months navigating the institutional space between her own professional ethics and Victor Kane's administrative decisions. She was not a villain, and she was not a hero, and she was the kind of person who appeared when the wind changed. 4 minutes was enough time to read a room. Greta had read it and gone back to do something with the information. Okay, Emma said. Garza was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Webb said you were in Kandahar for 2 years, attached to Vanguard. He talks too much. He talks the right amount. Garza's voice was neutral. I was in a parallel unit. Different region, same operational structure. I know what that posting looked like. She paused. I also know what it looks like to be back in a civilian context after something like that, and have people who've never been anywhere treat you like you're... She stopped, chose a different word. Less. Emma looked at her coffee cup. You don't stop knowing what you know, Garza said, even when they act like you don't know it. No, Emma said, you don't. They sat with that for a moment in the break room that smelled like old coffee and someone's lunch from 6 hours ago. And it was not a comfortable silence exactly, but it was an honest one. Emma's radio, she'd been given one by PAC when she came back into the ER, a Silver Crest channel unit, crackled. Whitmore, Theo's voice tighter than his usual register. Bay 2 is asking for you, Fisk specifically. She stood. On my way. I'll attempt. Fisk was not in Bay 2 because of Sims. Sims was stable, as she had left him, his vitals holding at a level that was still concerning but no longer immediately critical. Fisk was in Bay 2 because of the imaging report that had come back on patient 7 from the convoy, a man in his late 30s named only as Harlan in the preliminary intake, no last name provided on admission, who had presented with blunt abdominal trauma and had been triaged as moderate severity. The imaging told a different story. Splenic laceration, Fisk said, showing her the scan on the portable display. Grade 3, maybe bordering 4. He's been compensating. His pressure looked okay on intake, but look at the trend. He pointed to the vital sign graph. It's been dropping at about 2 millimeters per hour for the last 90 minutes. Slow enough that nobody flagged it as a trend. Emma looked at the numbers. He's bleeding internally, and we've had him in a monitored bay for 90 minutes without escalating. He's been compensating well, young, fit, but he's running out of compensation. Fisk's voice was careful. He needs surgery. Now, not in 30 minutes. Which OR is available? That's the problem. He set the tablet down. OR1 is occupied, the scheduled case that ran long. Or 2 had an emergency appendectomy come through the main OR scheduling 40 minutes ago. Or 3 is available but the on-call surgical team. He stopped. What? The on-call surgical team for abdominal procedures tonight is Dr. Warren and his resident. He paused. Warren called in sick at 6 this morning. His backup is Dr. Osei. Emma looked at him. Osei is an ER physician. Osei did a general surgery fellowship before he went into emergency medicine. 12 years ago. Fisk met her eyes. He hasn't been in an OR for 11 years. He told me himself, just now. The fluorescent light above them hummed. From somewhere in the ER, a monitor alarm sounded and then cut off as someone silenced it. Where's Osei? Emma said. Outside Bay 6, I just told him. She found Osei where Fisk said he'd be, standing outside Bay 6 with his arms at his sides and his reading glasses in his hand instead of on his head, which was the specific tell that meant he was not in a reviewing mode, but in a deciding mode. He looked at her when she came up. He didn't pretend the situation was different from what it was. I know what you're going to say, he said. What am I going to say? That I have to do it. I was going to ask if you felt like you could. She stopped beside him. Those are different questions. He looked through the Bay 6 window at Harlan, who was lying with his eyes open and his color off in the specific way that people in slow internal hemorrhage looked. Not dramatically pale, just incrementally wrong, the color of someone whose body has been quietly redirecting resources for the better part of 2 hours. 11 years, Osei said. I know. A lot changes in 11 years. The anatomy doesn't, Emma said, and you know that. He put his glasses back on his head. They stood there for a moment. If I go in there and I can't, he didn't finish the sentence. Then you stop and you call for help, and we figure out the next step, Emma said. But you're the best option Harlan has right now, and we both know it, and standing here talking about it is costing him time. Osei looked at her for a long moment, then he straightened his coat. Will you scrub in? He said. Yes. You're not a surgical nurse. No. But I've been in more emergency surgical procedures than anyone else in this building tonight, and you need another set of eyes that knows what they're looking at. She held his gaze. I'll stay out of your way. I won't second-guess you in the room, but I'll be there. He nodded once. Okay. They moved. Or 3 smelled like every OR she had ever been in. The specific cold chemical cleanness that had no real equivalent outside of surgical spaces. A smell that her nervous system had been trained over 2 years to associate with urgency and precision, and the specific narrowing of focus that happened when the environment demanded it. She scrubbed in beside Osei at the sink outside. 7 minutes. Thorough. Neither of them talked. The scrub tech, a Silvercrest veteran named Alvarez, who had been doing this for 22 years and wore the professional calm of someone who had seen most things, prepped the field without commentary. Harlan was under general anesthesia by the time they entered. His pressure was sitting at 92/60, which was workable but not comfortable, and the anesthesiologist, a small, focused woman named Dr. Lena Park, had already communicated the constraint. They had a window, and the window had edges. Osei stood at the table. Emma stood where she had said she would, slightly back, slightly to the side, out of the primary operative field, close enough to see everything. Ready? Alvarez said. Ready, Osei said. The first incision was clean. She watched his hands and she did not say anything, because his hands were not the hands of someone who had forgotten. Muscle memory was real, and it was deep, and Osei's body remembered the geometry of this even if his conscious mind was running 11 years of doubt alongside it. The laceration was where the imaging had said it would be. Posterior lower pole, grade 3, with a secondary tear that pushed it closer to grade 4 than Fisk had initially read. Contained, barely. The active bleeding was controlled and sluggish in the way of a wound that has been losing slowly and has not yet lost enough to catastrophize, which meant the window was real, but it was not infinite. Suction, Osei said. Alvarez responded. 14 minutes in, Osei found the second bleed. It was not in the imaging. It was in the tissue above the primary laceration, smaller, a vessel that had been nicked by shrapnel too small to show clearly on the scan. He stopped. Emma watched him stop. There, she said quietly, because she had seen it a half-second before he spoke. I see it. He was already adjusting. His hands were steady. Whatever he had been running alongside the procedure, the doubt, the 11-year gap, the weight of being the best available option rather than the obvious one, it was not in his hands. His hands were doing their job. Clip or suture? Alvarez asked. Suture, Osei said. Clip won't hold at this angle. He was right. Emma didn't say so. She watched him work. The second bleed was closed in 8 minutes. The primary laceration took another 22. When Osei stepped back from the table, Harlan's pressure was 98/64, and Park was already adjusting the anesthesia for closure. Osei looked at Emma across the table. She gave him a single nod. He exhaled through his nose, not a dramatic exhale, not a performance of relief, just the specific breath of someone who has held something tightly for a long time and is now setting it down. Good work, Alvarez said to the room in general, which was the most Alvarez ever said in an OR, and everyone in the room knew it. Beaumont said. They were outside the OR, de-gowning, when Emma's radio went off again. Not Theo this time. Rutherford's voice, and it had shifted register, still controlled, but carrying the specific frequency of someone delivering information that is about to change the shape of a situation. Whitmore, we need you back in the ER. There's a development. What kind? A pause. Kane's been talking. Since we secured the server room, he's been talking to Langford, to the board's emergency contact, to his own legal counsel. We've been monitoring the administrative corridor communications per the federal authorization. Another pause. He's not just defending himself, he's making a claim. Emma went still. What claim? He's saying the variance waiver was not his decision. He's saying he signed it under instruction. The radio crackled slightly. He's saying someone above him in the board structure ordered him to approve the Halcyon arrangement and to sign off on any safety review bypasses. He's saying he has documentation. Emma looked at Osei, who had heard enough of this to have stopped moving. Does he? Emma said into the radio. That's what we're trying to determine. But if he does, Rutherford stopped. If he does, then the person who made the original decision isn't Kane, and that person has been in this hospital today. Emma's hand tightened on the radio. Who? She said. Rutherford's voice came back flat and even and carrying the specific weight of information that once said cannot be unsaid. The name on the instruction memo, he said, is the chairman of Silvercrest's board of directors, a man named Aldous Price. A beat. Who arrived at this hospital 40 minutes ago and has been in the administrative suite ever since. The OR corridor was very quiet. Emma looked at the wall. Aldous Price had been chairman of Silvercrest's board for 9 years. He had been at her welcome orientation when she first joined. He had shaken her hand. She remembered his hand, dry, firm, the handshake of a man who had practiced it. He's still here? She said. He's still here, Rutherford said, and he just requested a meeting with Director Sims. Emma moved before Rutherford finished the transmission. Not running. The corridor didn't allow for running, and running communicated panic. And panic was the specific thing she could not afford right now. But moving with the purposeful stride of someone who has identified a problem and is already 3 steps into solving it. Osei fell in beside her without being asked, which she noted and appreciated. Price requested a meeting with Sims, she said, half to herself and half to OC. Sims just came out of an invasive procedure. He's conscious, but he's not. He's not at full capacity. He doesn't know what we know about Price. Can Rutherford stop the meeting? Rutherford can try. But Price is the board chairman of this institution. On paper, he has legitimate reason to check on a federal official who was treated here. She pushed through the door to the main ER corridor. On paper, Rutherford was at the central station, and he had already made the same calculation. I can't legally prevent the meeting, he said when she came up. Not yet. The memo connecting Price to the procurement instruction, Kane's claim, that's a verbal statement so far. We're pulling the documentation he says exists, but we haven't confirmed it. Until we have something concrete, Price is a board chairman visiting his hospital during a crisis. He's going to try to talk to Sims before we can brief Sims on what we know, Emma said. Yes. Does Sims know Price? Rutherford's expression shifted slightly. They've met, professionally. Sims ran a federal compliance audit on a Price-affiliated company 4 years ago. He paused. The audit resulted in a settlement, significant one. Emma looked at him. Sims audited a Price company 4 years ago, before Price's involvement with Silvercrest. And now Sims is in this hospital, and Price is the chairman, and Price apparently ordered the waiver that compromised the equipment that she stopped. The thing she was assembling in her mind was not a comfortable thing. Rutherford said it for her. We don't know if the convoy attack and Price are connected. That's a significant leap. I'm not making the leap, Emma said. I'm noting the shape. He looked at her steadily. The shape is being noted by people with more investigative authority than either of us. What I need right now is to get ahead of Price reaching Sims before we can brief Sims. He turned to the man at the terminal beside him. Where is Price now? Administrative suite, second floor. He's been there for 48 minutes. And Sims is in Bay 2? Yes. What's the only route from the administrative suite to Bay 2 that doesn't go through the central ER? The man checked something. Service elevator to the ground floor, then through the east corridor. Rutherford turned to Garza. East corridor. Garza nodded and was already moving. Emma looked at the door to Bay 2. I need 5 minutes with Sims before anyone else gets to him. Can you give me 5 minutes? Rutherford checked his watch. You have 4. She went. Sims was awake. He was propped slightly on the bed in Bay 2, his color better than it had been 2 hours ago. His eyes carrying the particular alertness of someone whose body was recovering faster than expected and whose mind was working independently of the body's pace. He looked at Emma when she came through the curtain. The nurse, he said. Yes? She pulled the curtain closed behind her. How are you feeling? Like someone removed things from my chest cavity. His voice was rough but clear. Which I'm told is accurate. It is. She moved to the monitor, checked his vitals by habit, processed them in under 3 seconds, and turned back to him. I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear it quickly because we don't have a lot of time. He watched her. He was, she realized, the kind of man who listened with his whole face, eyes steady, no distracting movement, the complete attention of someone who spent a professional life sorting relevant information from noise. Victor Kane, she said, the chief administrator who terminated me this morning. He's made a statement that the procurement arrangement with Halcyon Med Supply, the vendor connected to the equipment failures, was conducted under instruction from the board chairman, a man named Aldous Price. No visible reaction from Sims, which was itself a reaction. Kane claims he has documentation, Emma continued. Rutherford's team is trying to verify it. What I need you to know is that Price is in this building right now, in the administrative suite, and he's requested a meeting with you. Sims was quiet for a moment. Has he? Yes. And you're telling me this because you think I should know before he gets here. I'm telling you this because you're the senior federal official in this building, and you were attacked today on a route that was filed on a limited distribution list, and I think you should have the full picture before you decide what to say to the man who runs the institution that treated you. Sims looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise, not alarm, but the specific quality of a calculation being completed. Aldous Price, he said carefully, has not been a random feature of my professional life. Rutherford mentioned an audit. Rutherford knows the public part. Sims shifted slightly on the bed, and she could see the wince he controlled before it fully formed. 4 years ago, the compliance audit on Price's logistics company uncovered a subcontracting arrangement with a federal medical supply vendor. We settled the primary violations. There were secondary findings we were still developing when he stopped. When the investigation was transferred to another division, and I lost oversight. Emma processed this. Transferred why? Officially, jurisdictional reorganization. His voice was flat. It happens. It also sometimes happens for other reasons. The bay was very quiet. The monitors ran their rhythms. You think someone moved the investigation away from you, Emma said. I think it's a question I've had for 4 years. He looked at the curtain, and I think the answer is in this building, one way or another. Footsteps in the corridor outside, moving at a controlled pace. Not running, deliberate. Emma looked at Sims. Tell me what you need, she said. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but it got close. Stay in the room, he said. You're my medical attendant. You have every reason to be here. She moved to the side of the bay, the position that was most naturally a nurse's position, near the monitor, slightly behind the visitor's line of sight, and she was there when the curtain opened. Aldous Price was 67, silver-haired in a way that money maintained, dressed in a charcoal suit that had not been bought for a hospital visit, but fit the hospital visit the way expensive things fit wherever they were put. He had the face of a man who had spent decades being trusted and had found it a comfortable state to inhabit. His eyes were pale, attentive, and moved across the bay in a single sweep that registered Emma and then categorized her as unimportant, which was, she thought, a very consistent mistake people made. Harold, he said warmly, moving toward the bed with his hand extended. Sims did not extend his. He looked at Price's hand for a moment, then looked at Price's face. Aldous, he said. Something adjusted behind Price's eyes, barely perceptible. He lowered his hand and redirected the gesture toward the chair beside the bed, settling into it with the ease of a man who sat in chairs he owned. Hell of a day, Price said. I came as soon as I heard. How are you feeling? Like I said something similar to someone else not 5 minutes ago, Sims said. I'll skip the social portion if you don't mind. A short pause. Of course. I understand there's been some internal difficulty today, beyond the obvious. The administrator situation, Price said. Yes, it's... Victor made some decisions that didn't go through proper channels. We're reviewing that. Sims's voice was neutral in the specific way that federal investigators trained themselves to be neutral, not flat, not hostile, simply absent of invitation. And the procurement arrangement with Halcyon, another pause, slightly longer. That's under review as well. Under your review? Or external? Price tilted his head slightly. Harold, you were in an attack this morning. You've had surgery. I came here to... I know why you came here, Sims said. The room held that for a moment. Emma did not move. She kept her eyes on the monitor and her attention on everything else, the way she had learned in the field to be in 2 states simultaneously, functionally present in the task directly in front of you and completely aware of every other variable in the room. The Halcyon arrangement, Sims said, the same vendor structure as Meridian Logistics, which you'll remember we discussed 4 years ago in a different context. Price was still. That's ancient history. History has a way of not staying where you put it. Sims looked at him without any apparent urgency. I'm going to be honest with you, Aldous. I came through Ravenport today on a transit that was on a limited distribution list. 6 people knew that route, maybe 7. I've been running the numbers since I woke up in this bed, and I keep arriving at the same short list. He paused. Your name is on that list. Price's expression didn't collapse. It was better than that. It held, and the holding of it was itself the tell, the micromuscular effort of keeping a face in a configuration it no longer naturally occupied. That's a serious thing to say, Price said quietly. Yes, Sims agreed. It is. Emma's hand was near the call button. Not on it, near it. Price stood. He did it slowly, the way powerful men stand when they're recalibrating. Not fleeing, repositioning. I'm going to let you rest, he said. We can talk when you're recovered. This isn't the time, or the... Colonel Rutherford, Sims said at a normal volume. The curtain opened. Rutherford stepped in. Behind him, two of his people. And behind them, a woman Emma had not seen before. Mid-40s, civilian clothes, a credentials wallet in her hand that she held open at chest height. Mr. Price, the woman said. Special Agent Dina Marsh, Federal Bureau of Operational Security, Financial Crimes and Corruption Division. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Price looked at his credentials. He looked at Rutherford. He looked at Sims. Sims was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who is very tired and has just finished doing something that needed doing. I'll want my attorney, Price said. That's entirely your right, Marsh said. We can make that call from here. They took Price out of Bay 2 and the curtain fell closed behind them, and Emma and Sims were alone in the bay with the monitors and the September afternoon light coming through the narrow window above the bed. Thank you, Sims said to the ceiling. You did that yourself, Emma said. I had the information I needed going in. He turned his head to look at her. That's the difference. She moved back to check his vitals because they were there and they needed checking. And because after a conversation like that, a person's blood pressure did things that were worth documenting. His vitals were fine. His pressure was elevated, but within the range you'd expect from a man who just did what he'd done. Rest, she said. Probably, he agreed. She left him and walked back into the ER. The next 2 hours were not dramatic in the way that the previous 6 had been dramatic. They were the specific kind of difficult that comes after the acute emergency passes. The administrative rubble, the documentation, the clinical follow-through that doesn't photograph well but constitutes the actual difference between a patient who recovers and one who doesn't. Emma wrote her incident report. It was 8 pages. She did not soften any of it. Fisk countersigned her clinical observations on the fragment migration. He added 3 lines of his own assessment that described her decision-making as, quote, consistent with advanced trauma management practice and demonstrably superior to the alternative approaches available at the time. He showed her before he submitted it, and she told him he didn't have to. He said he was aware of that. The 9 convoy patients were distributed across the hospital floors by 6 in the evening, all stable, the most critical under continuous monitoring. Harlan, the man from Bay 6 whose second bleed Osei had found and closed in the OR, was in post-operative recovery and had asked, upon waking, whether the nurse with the dark hair had left yet. Theo had come to tell Emma this with the air of someone delivering news he found meaningful. Tell him I hope he feels better soon, she said. He asked if you'd stop by. She stopped by. Harlan was 37, it turned out, and worked in federal transport, and had 4 stitches worth of humor about the fact that his worst work-related injury had come from a trip to Ravenport that had nothing to do with his job description. She stayed 4 minutes. It was enough. At 7:40 in the evening, Rutherford found her in the documentation room, which was a closet with 2 computers and a persistent smell of toner, and he sat down in the second chair and put a folder on the desk between them. Kane's documentation, he said. We verified it. She looked at the folder. It exists, he said. 3 emails and a signed internal memorandum. Price instructed Kane to approve the Halcyon variance waivers, directly, explicitly, in writing. He paused. Kane kept copies in a personal encrypted file that he'd accessed from his home system, not on the hospital server. So when he went to the server room, he was actually trying to access the backup copies he'd uploaded to the hospital system from home, not to delete the originals, to retrieve them. He wanted them in hand before everything moved too fast. Rutherford's voice carried something close to a dry acknowledgement. He was protecting himself, not covering for Price. He'd been protecting himself for 6 months. Emma considered this. He knew. He knew the arrangement was compromised. He didn't know about the convoy attack. At least that's his position, and we have no evidence contradicting it so far. Rutherford looked at the folder. Kane is cooperating fully. His legal counsel arrived 90 minutes ago, and the first thing Kane did was produce a complete record of his communications with Price going back 14 months. What's in them? A board chairman who used his position to direct procurement decisions in a way that benefited a vendor with whom he had a concealed financial relationship. A kickback arrangement, effectively, through a subsidiary company. Rutherford opened the folder and turned it toward her. Halcyon Med Supply is a subsidiary of a holding company registered in 3 states. That holding company has an equity partner. He pointed to a line on the document. The name was a company designation, not Price's name directly, but the name of a company that, as Rutherford explained, could be traced through 2 layers of ownership to a personal investment vehicle registered under Aldous Price's wife's maiden name. He was taking money from the vendor whose products he was ordering the hospital to buy, Emma said. Without disclosing the financial relationship to the board, yes, while simultaneously directing the chief administrator to bypass safety reviews that might have flagged those products for quality issues. Rutherford closed the folder. The variance waivers you flagged 3 days ago, Emma, the ones nobody acted on, the regulators. If those regulators had been used on a patient under positive pressure today, during the emergency, what would have happened? She had been thinking about this. The pressure fluctuation wouldn't necessarily cause immediate failure, but in a patient with compromised respiratory function, on extended ventilation, you'd see desaturation, potentially respiratory arrest. It depends on the patient's underlying condition and how long they were on the equipment. Fisk told me the same thing, different words. Rutherford was quiet for a moment. The regulators in bays 3 and 4 were pulled per your instruction this morning. We had them tested this afternoon. He looked at her directly. 2 out of the 4 units we tested failed pressure tolerance at the threshold range. Not failed completely. Failed within the range that would produce the outcome you just described. The documentation room was very quiet. If I hadn't flagged it, Emma said. If you hadn't flagged it, and if someone hadn't pulled those regulators today, and if someone had used them on one of the 9 patients currently upstairs, Rutherford stopped. We can't run the what if all the way, but the equipment was defective and it was in the bays and nobody was going to remove it. Emma looked at the wall. You were fired, Rutherford said, for flagging exactly this. And the equipment you flagged would have hurt someone. Possibly today. She didn't say anything for a moment. I know, she finally said. I want to make sure it's in the record clearly, he said. Not for your benefit, although it benefits you, because the record matters. I know that too. He picked up the folder. Marsh has Price in a federal interview room. He's stopped talking, which is his right. His attorney is good. He stood. But the documentary evidence doesn't need him to talk. He left. Emma sat in the documentation room for a while after that, alone with the toner smell and the sound of the building doing what hospital buildings do in the evening. The shift change announcements, the elevator cycling, the particular quality of an institution that never actually stops. She pressed 2 fingers to her sternum, not calculating this time, just noticing she was still there. Then she went back to work, because there were still patients upstairs who needed coverage notes before the night shift took over. And that was the job. And the job didn't wait for anyone to finish processing things. At 9:15, Donna found her at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor. Donna Pratt had been charge nurse at Silvercrest for 11 years. She was a person who held herself with the specific containment of someone who had, over a long professional life, learned to manage her reactions and therefore managed them perhaps slightly too well, the way a pressure vessel manages pressure, functional, reliable, and occasionally difficult to read. She stood beside Emma at the station and looked at the charts Emma was updating. I should have pulled those regulators myself, Donna said. Emma didn't stop writing. I saw the spec sheet, Donna said. I knew you weren't wrong. She stopped. I knew how Victor would react. I didn't want to be the one who made that call. Emma finished the note she was writing and set down the pen. Donna, she said, I'm not going to tell you it's fine. It's not fine. You knew and you didn't act, and that's a real thing. She looked at her. But you also called Osei. You pushed him to look at it. You didn't just bury it completely. I didn't push hard enough. No, Emma agreed. You didn't. Donna absorbed this without flinching, which was, Emma thought, the thing she'd always respected about her. She didn't deflect. I'm sorry, Donna said. I know. Emma picked up the pen again. The night shift is going to need the coverage notes on beds 7, 12, and 14 before 11. Can you make sure the handoff gets the updated vitals from 6:30? Donna looked at her for a moment. Then she picked up a chart. I'll handle it. They worked in silence for the next 20 minutes, side by side at the station, in the way that people sometimes work after a hard conversation. Not repaired, not finished, but in the functional proximity of people who are going to have to figure out how to continue to work together and are beginning the preliminary stages of that project. Victor Kane was arrested at 10:08 in the evening. Emma was not in the ER when it happened. She was on the second floor documenting a medication adjustment for one of the convoy patients, and she heard about it from Theo, who texted her a single sentence that read, "They just walked Kane out the front in handcuffs." Half the night shift was watching. She finished the documentation. Then she texted back, "Okay." The charges, she learned later, were financial fraud, falsification of medical safety records, obstruction of a federal investigation, and 2 additional counts related to the procurement arrangement that Rutherford's people were still working to fully characterize. Kane had cooperated, which would matter at sentencing, and which meant, practically, that everything he knew about Price was now on a federal record. Price's charges were longer and would take longer to fully assemble. Marcia's division had been working the financial thread since late afternoon, and it had roots that went deeper than Silvercrest and wider than one vendor relationship. The Meridian Logistics investigation, the one that had been transferred away from Sims 4 years ago, was being reviewed in light of new evidence, which was the bureaucratic way of saying that someone had interfered with a federal investigation and that interference was now, itself, under investigation. Emma heard all of this in pieces over the course of the evening, the way you hear things in a hospital, in fragments between tasks, from people passing through, in the 30-second windows between one thing and the next. At 11:30, the overnight attending took formal charge of the ER, and Emma's clinical role for the day, such as it had been, was technically over. She stood at the nurses' station on the ground floor and looked at the shift change happening around her. The night nurses coming in, the day shift beginning to filter out, the organism of the hospital continuing its respiration regardless of everything that had happened inside it. Fisk passed through the station at 11:42, coat on, heading for the exit. He stopped when he saw her. "Go home," he said. "I'm working on it." "Work faster." He adjusted his bag on his shoulder. "Whitmore, for what it's worth, today was... what you did was not small." "Harlan's alive," she said. "Sims is alive. The other 9 patients are stable. That's the measure." "That's part of the measure." He looked at her directly. "The other part is that you flagged a safety failure 3 days ago and were fired for it, and today that safety failure almost killed people, and you still came back in and did the work." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's actually what this job is supposed to be." He left. She stood at the station for a moment. Around her, the night shift settled into its rhythms, monitors, low voices, the specific quieter frequency of a hospital after midnight. She was gathering her tote bag from the locker she'd been given access to during the day. A spare one. Someone had cleared it out for her hours ago, and she hadn't thought about it until now. When her phone rang, the screen said, "Colonel Dre." She answered. "Dre." "I know it's late," Dre said. "I'll be brief. Director Sims asked me to make a call. He wants to discuss your situation in a formal context, specifically regarding the termination and the sequence of events today." "My situation?" "Your employment status, the circumstances of the termination, the regulatory filing he intends to make with the state medical board regarding Kane's conduct." A pause. "He also mentioned that the JOMU has an open position in their civilian medical liaison program. He wanted me to mention it, not as a pressure, just as information." Emma looked at the inside of the locker. Someone had left a coffee mug in it from before whoever had used it last. The mug had a cartoon bird on it. "Tell him I heard that," she said, "and tell him I'll think about it." "I will." Dre paused. "One more thing. The commendation. The National Service Commendation from your Kandahar rotation. It was recommended 18 months ago by the Vanguard Unit Commander. It got caught in a processing backlog." Another pause. "The backlog is being cleared. You should expect formal notification in the next 10 days. Emma was quiet. "Whitmore?" "I'm here," she said. Go home, Dre said. You've had enough of a day. Emma said goodnight and ended the call. She picked up her tote bag. She looked at the coffee mug for a moment, then took it out of the locker and set it on the shelf beside the sink, because someone might want it, and leaving things in better shape than you found them was a habit she'd never been able to quit. She walked through the ER, past Bay 1, where Sims's monitoring equipment still ran its steady reports, past the central station, where the night charge nurse was reviewing handoff notes, past the door to the administrative corridor, which was closed, the lights beyond it dimmed, the suite where Aldous Price had sat for 48 minutes before Special Agent Marsh's credentials changed the architecture of his evening. She pushed through the front doors. The September night was cool, clear, the specific quality of late-night air that felt like the day had finally finished deciding what it was going to be. The parking lot was mostly empty. Her car was where she'd left it. She'd never moved it to the east lot after the morning fell apart. And she walked toward it with her tote bag over one shoulder and the night air on her face and the particular weight of a day that had asked for everything she had and then asked for a little more. She was at her car, keys in hand. Her phone rang again. Unknown number, different prefix from any of the earlier calls. She almost didn't answer. She was standing in a parking lot at 11:50 at night and she was very tired and the day had held more than enough. She answered, "Ms. Whitmore." A man's voice. Not military, not clinical. Something else. The specific composed register of someone who had been a professional for a long time in a field that trained for composure under pressure. "My name is Walter Bream. I'm an attorney. I represent Aldous Price." Emma said nothing. "I apologize for the hour," Bream said. "I'll be direct. My client has authorized me to reach out to you specifically. He has information he believes is relevant to your situation, your termination, and the events of today, that he has not yet shared with federal investigators." A pause. "Information he's willing to provide, but with conditions." "Call Rutherford," Emma said. "My client isn't calling Rutherford." Bream's voice was steady. "My client is calling you, because the information concerns you directly, and because," a pause that was just long enough to be deliberate, "because what he knows is not only about today. It goes back further than today, further than Silvercrest." His voice dropped slightly. "It goes back to Kandahar." The parking lot was very quiet. Emma's keys were in her hand. Her car was 18 inches away. The night air was cool and still, and her heart rate had just done something she didn't have time to fully catalog. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means," Bream said carefully, "that the reason your commendation was held in processing for 18 months was not a backlog. And it means my client knows who made sure it was held, and why, and what that person was protecting." He paused. "Ms. Whitmore, the convoy attack on Director Sims today, the investigative transfer 4 years ago, the vendor arrangement, the termination this morning." A long pause. "My client says to tell you these are not separate stories. They are one story, and you have been in it much longer than you know." She stood in the parking lot for 4 seconds with the phone against her ear and the keys cutting into her palm from how hard she was holding them. Then she said, "Where?" Bream named a location, a hotel conference room 3 blocks from the hospital, the kind of mid-tier business hotel that existed in every city to host the kinds of conversations that needed a table and a door that closed. He said 20 minutes. She said she'd be there in 15 because she was done letting other people set the pace of things that concerned her directly. She called Rutherford from the car. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping, which she filed without surprise. "Price's attorney just called me," she said. "Bream. He wants to meet. He says Price has information about a larger network, the convoy, the Sims investigation transfer, and something connected to my Kandahar commendation hold." She pulled out of the lot. "He said these aren't separate events." A pause. "Don't go alone." "I wasn't planning to. I'll have Garza there in 10 minutes. Tell her to come in through the side entrance and sit in the back corner. I don't want Bream to know she's there until I decide I want him to know." Another pause. "You've done this before." "Not in a hotel conference room," she said, "but yes." She drove the 3 blocks and sat in the parking lot for 2 minutes, long enough for Garza to text that she was already inside, which meant Garza was faster than 10 minutes, and had already read the situation without needing it explained. Emma appreciated that about her. The conference room was beige and carpeted and had a long table with 8 chairs and a whiteboard on one wall, still showing the ghost of a pie chart from whoever had been there before. Bream was at the far end of the table, in 50s, measured, the physical stillness of a man whose job was to be the calmest person in difficult rooms. A leather briefcase was open in front of him, a yellow legal pad, a pen that he was not using. He stood when she came in. She sat down without shaking his hand, not hostilely, simply without performing social rituals she wasn't interested in. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Tell me what you have," she said. He sat. He looked at her for a moment with the evaluating quality of someone who was revising their expectations in real time. "You're not what I expected." "Nobody is." "Tell me what you have." He opened the briefcase and laid 3 documents on the table, face down. He left them face down, which was a negotiation move, and she didn't look at them, which was her response to it. "My client is not a good man," Bream said. "I want to be clear that I'm not here to argue otherwise. He made decisions over a period of years that were self-serving, financially corrupt, and in the case of the equipment waivers, genuinely dangerous. He knows what he's facing." He paused. "What he also knows is that he was operating within a structure that was larger than Silver Crest, a structure with reach into federal contracting, procurement oversight, and this is the part that's relevant to you, Military and Veteran Service Administration." Emma kept her face still. "The commendation hold," Bream said. "It wasn't bureaucratic delay. There's a person, a specific individual, not my client, who flagged your service record for administrative review 18 months ago. That flag was designed to delay the commendation processing indefinitely, in a way that could be explained as standard backlog." He paused. "The same individual had the Sims investigation transferred 4 years ago. The same individual has a financial interest in the vendor network that Halcyon is part of, a network that runs through federal medical supply contracts, military procurement, and at least 4 hospital systems in 3 states." "Who is this person?" Emma said. "My client will provide that name," Bream said, "in exchange for a formal cooperation agreement with the federal investigation. That agreement needs to come from Marsh's division, co-signed by Director Sims's office." He straightened the documents in front of him without turning them over. He's not asking for immunity. He knows he's going to prison. He's asking for the cooperation to be on record, so that what he provides is used and the person at the top of this is actually prosecuted and not, he paused, not managed, not quietly dealt with, actually prosecuted. Emma looked at him for a moment. "Why me? Why call me instead of going directly to Rutherford or Marsh?" Bream met her eyes. "Because my client says the person he's naming has enough institutional protection that the case needs an anchor. Someone whose record, whose conduct today, and whose documented history of flagging these violations correctly and early. Someone whose paper trail is completely clean and completely contrary to what this person has tried to do to her." He paused. "He says you're the through line. Everything they did, the commendation hold, the termination, the vendor arrangements, all of it is more coherent as a case when it's organized around what they did to you and why." Emma sat with that for a moment. She thought about this morning. 7:15, Victor's office, the plant on the locker shelf, the way Roy had apologized quietly at the door. She thought about the email she'd sent 3 days ago with the calibration data, the email that had gone into whatever institutional void emails go into when powerful people decide they'd rather not receive them. She thought about a forward operating base common room and a man bleeding on the floor and 6 hours of keeping him alive with what she had. "Turn the documents over," she said. Bream turned them over. She read them. She took her time. When she finished, she took out her phone and called Rutherford and said, "Come in." And he came through the door 30 seconds later because he had been, she realized, in the parking lot. Garza stood up from the back corner. Bream looked at the room and made a calculation and then looked back at Emma. "You set this up before you came in." "I came in with information that suggested I was walking into something significant," she said. "I prepared accordingly." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that means fair enough. Rutherford sat down. He read the documents Bream had laid out. He made 3 calls from his phone in rapid succession, stepping to the corner of the room for each one. When he sat back down, his face was the same steady, controlled face it always was, but his eyes had the quality of someone who had just confirmed that a thing was even larger than they'd suspected. "Marsh will be here in 40 minutes, he said. "Sims has been briefed and has given verbal authorization for the cooperation framework. We'll need to draft the formal agreement tonight." "My client will sign tonight," Bream said. "Then we have a lot of work to do," Rutherford said. Emma looked at the documents on the table. She looked at the ghost pie chart on the whiteboard. She looked at her hands. "The name," she said to Bream. "The person at the top. I don't need to know it tonight, but I need to know one thing." She looked at him directly. "Did they know about today, the convoy attack? Were they part of that decision?" Bream was quiet for a moment. "My client believes so," he said. "He can't prove it directly. But the circumstantial chain—" He paused. "Yes, my client believes the decision to leak the route was made above him by someone who understood that Sims was getting close again after 4 years, and who understood that the Silvercrest situation was becoming a liability." "A liability," Emma said. "You," Bream said quietly. "Your flag, your email. A nurse in an emergency department who documented a safety failure connected to a vendor network they'd been protecting for years. They were already working to manage that. The termination was—" He stopped. "My client says the termination was recommended to Kane from above, with the specific reason being to remove the documentation before it could be formally investigated." Emma was very still. "They fired me," she said, "because I was close to something they'd been hiding for years." "Yes. And the plan was to discredit the flag by eliminating the person who made it." "Yes." She looked at the table. She pressed 2 fingers against her sternum. Then she stood up, because there was nothing more she needed from this room tonight, and Rutherford and Marsh could build what needed to be built, and the name would come, and the person it belonged to would be at the end of a chain of evidence that started with a calibration variance on an oxygen regulator and a nurse who couldn't let it go. "I'll be available for whatever the investigation needs," she told Rutherford. "Testimony, documentation, anything." She picked up her tote bag. "But tonight I need to go home." He looked at her. "Go home," he said. "You've done enough for one day. Possibly for 1 year." Garza held the door. Batsum. The name came out 11 days later. Emma was at her kitchen table with coffee and a documentation form for the state nursing board when her phone showed Rutherford's number. He told her in 3 sentences. The individual was a senior official in the Federal Procurement Oversight Office, a position that gave him review authority over federal medical supply contracts and enough institutional cover to redirect investigations and flag administrative records without triggering automatic scrutiny. His name was Clement Ford. He had been in his position for 7 years and had, over those 7 years, built a financial arrangement with the vendor network that had paid him, conservatively, $4.3 million in untraceable income. "He was arrested this morning," Rutherford said. "Federal agents at his office. It was not quiet." Emma held her coffee cup with both hands. "Sims?" "Sims is recovering. He'll be at the formal proceedings." A pause. "Ford's connection to the convoy attack is being prosecuted as a separate count. There's enough. It's going to hold." She sat with that for a moment. "And Price?" "Pled to 3 counts this morning. Cooperation agreement finalized. He'll serve time." Rutherford's voice was level. "Kane has a separate plea arrangement. Cooperation credit, but he's still looking at significant consequences. The falsification of safety records charge alone carries weight." "Good," she said. Not with satisfaction exactly. With the specific quietness of something that was the right outcome and needed to be acknowledged as such. "There's one more thing," Rutherford said. "The commendation ceremony. It's been scheduled. 2 weeks from Friday, Fort Keene." A pause. "Director Sims will be there. He specifically requested it." Emma looked out her kitchen window. It was mid-October and the trees in the yard had gone to their autumn colors, the specific red and orange of late season, the colors that said something is ending and the ending is not a loss. "I'll be there," she said. The Silvercrest board made its public statement, 9 days after the arrests, which was 7 days longer than it should have taken and 2 days shorter than Emma had expected. The statement acknowledged failures in procurement oversight, safety review processes, and staff management. It acknowledged that a nurse had flagged safety concerns that were not acted upon, and that the failure to act on those concerns had created conditions that endangered patients. It used the word wrongful in describing the termination, which was the word that mattered legally. It also announced the appointment of an interim chief administrator while a formal search was conducted. And it announced the creation of a patient safety oversight committee with independent authority to review and escalate concerns, reporting directly to the board rather than through administration. Greta Langford was named interim chief administrator. Emma read that and considered it for a moment. Greta was not a hero. She was the person who had come to the ER during the crisis, read the room in 4 minutes, and gone back upstairs to do something with the information. In the days that followed, it had emerged that Greta had been the one to give Rutherford's team full access to the administrative suite's communications records. She had made that decision unilaterally, without waiting to be asked, before Price had been formally detained. That decision had yielded the communications that tied Price to the Ford network. Not a hero. Careful, and then, at the moment it mattered, decisive. Emma sent her a short email. "Congratulations. The safety committee is the right call. If you want input on the protocol structure, I'm available." She did not offer anything more than that because Greta would either take it or not, and either way, Emma had said what she had to say. Greta responded within an hour. "I'll take you up on that. When can you come in?" Emma came in on a Thursday morning, 10 days after the arrests, in her own clothes, without a badge, without a role, without any of the institutional framing that had once defined what she was allowed to be in that building. She came in through the front doors, and Roy was at the desk, and he looked up and his face did the thing it had done 11 days ago, except this time there was nothing complicated in it. "Ms. Whitmore," he said. "Roy," she said. "Good morning." She met with Greta for 2 hours and covered 4 years' worth of what she'd observed about the gap between Silvercrest's written safety protocols and how they actually functioned on the ground. She was specific, documented, and honest about the places where she had made the decision to flag things internally, rather than going external sooner, and what that decision had cost. "Why didn't you go outside the hospital?" Greta asked at one point. When Kane didn't respond. When Osei said after rounds, "You had options." Emma thought about this. "Because I thought I could fix it from inside," she said. "Because going outside felt like giving up on the institution." She paused. That was wrong. Not morally wrong. Strategically wrong. When the institution is protecting a problem, working inside the institution just absorbs you. You become part of the furniture. And now? Now I think the outside pressure and the inside knowledge have to work together. You need people who know the building and people who can see it from outside. Both. Neither one alone changes anything. Greta wrote something on her notepad. "I want you to help design the escalation protocol for the new committee, in writing, something with teeth." She looked up. "I'd also like to offer you your position back." Emma had expected this. She'd been deciding what to say for 4 days. "I appreciate it," she said. "I don't think I'm going back to the same position." Greta waited. "Dre's office has offered me a civilian liaison role with the Joint Operational Medical Unit, developing trauma response protocols for hospital systems in regions with high military population, using what I know about both environments." She paused. "I think that's where the work is. Not just for me, for a problem that nobody's been solving. You'd still consult on the committee protocol?" "Yes. That I'll do." She looked at Greta steadily. "The safety committee needs to be real, Greta, not a gesture. Real authority, real access, real consequences for non-compliance. If it becomes window dressing, I won't lend my name to it." "I know," Greta said. "That's why I'm asking you." Fort Keene on a Friday in late October sat under a sky that had gone pale and clear after a week of overcast, the kind of day that arrived without warning and made everything look sharper than usual. The ceremony was not large. Military ceremonies rarely were, when they were real. The large ones were for something else, for morale and optics and the institutional need to perform itself. This one was a room with about 40 people, a podium, and a flag. Sims was there. He moved carefully, recovering with the specific deliberateness of someone who had recently been reminded that the body has limits. He shook Emma's hand before the ceremony and said, "I owe you a longer conversation when I'm not still held together with Fisk's handiwork." "You don't owe me anything," she said. "That's not true," he said. "But I'll let you have the last word on it for now." Marcus Webb was there, in uniform, which she hadn't seen in 2 years. He looked like himself and also like someone who had been doing something demanding in the time between, which was probably accurate. "You look better than you did in a parking garage," he said. "Lower bar than you think," she said. He almost laughed. He laughed a lot more than she remembered from Kandahar, which might have meant something, or might have meant he was just older and less tightly wound. Rutherford spoke briefly before the citation was read. He did not editorialize. He had the military's specific economy with language when formality was called for. But he noted factually that the documentation of Emma Whitmore's conduct over the previous 2 years, including the Kandahar rotation and the events of September's emergency, represented an uncommon consistency of competence under pressure across contexts that most medical personnel never encountered once. The citation itself was read by a general whose name Emma had known for years in the abstract, and was now standing 6 feet from, which had a faintly surreal quality she managed by focusing on the words rather than the occasion. The words were specific. They named dates and situations. They named the 6 hours in the forward operating base, and the fragment assessment, and the committee documentation she'd produced for Greta, and they named the calibration flag. The email sent 3 days before she was fired, the email that nobody had answered. When the medal was pinned, a National Service Commendation, the physical object smaller than the occasion around it, which was how these things always were. Emma stood straight and kept her face even, and felt, underneath all of it, the specific complicated texture of being recognized for something you did because it needed doing, by people who had the authority to make the recognition mean something, after 2 years of doing it in rooms where nobody was watching and it cost you rather than rewarded you. It was not a simple feeling. She would have been suspicious of it if it had been. Afterwards, she stood outside with coffee from the reception table, looking at the October sky, and Ose found her. He had come. She hadn't known he was going to, and his presence surprised her in a way that required a second to process. "I drove," he said. 3 hours. I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought I owed you the in-person version of some things." "You didn't have to do that." "No," he said, "but I wanted to." He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the same sky she was looking at, which made the conversation easier for both of them. "The committee protocol you drafted with Greta. I've read it. It's good. The escalation pathway is different from anything we had before." "Good different or bad different?" "Good. It assumes the institution will fail the individual. It builds around that assumption instead of pretending it won't happen." He paused. "I've been a department head for 6 years and I never built anything that assumed the institution would fail. I always assumed if I did the right thing inside the system would—" He stopped. "The system didn't." "No," she said. "I should have pulled those regulators." "Ose. I know. We've done the version where you accept my apology gracefully. I just need to say it one more time for myself." He looked at his coffee cup. "I should have pulled them. I should have pushed harder when Kane fired you. I knew you were right, and I let the friction cost me more than the principle." He paused. "Harlan is going to be okay, by the way. He was discharged 4 days ago." "I know. He sent me a text." Ose almost smiled. Of course he did. They stood in the October air for a little while, 2 imperfect people who had navigated a genuinely terrible day with the specific combination of competence and failure that characterized most of what human beings managed in high-stakes situations, and who were now, in the aftermath, doing the slow work of figuring out what to do next. "The JOMU position," Ose said eventually. "Are you taking it?" "Yes," he nodded. "Good." He paused. "You'll be better used there than you were being used here." "I was being used fine," she said. "Until I wasn't." "You know what I mean." "I do," she said. "And thank you for driving 3 hours." He shrugged, which was the Ose version of "you're welcome." and they finished their coffee in the comfortable quiet of people who had been through something together and come out on the other side with a clear-eyed understanding of who each other was, neither idealized nor dismissed. She drove back to Ravenport alone, which was what she'd wanted. The highway home went through the kind of landscape that October did something beautiful to. Flat stretches, and then low hills, everything red and amber, and the occasional stubborn green, the sky already darker at the edges at 4 in the afternoon. She drove with the radio off. She didn't need noise. The day had been full enough. She thought about the email she'd sent 3 days before the termination, the one nobody answered. She thought about sitting in front of the calibration sheet and running the numbers and knowing with the specific certainty that you only have when you've been trained to assess risk in environments where wrong assessments cost people their lives, that the variance was real and that it mattered. She had sent the email anyway. She had followed up twice. She had escalated through every channel available to her inside the institution. She had been fired for it, and then she had gone back in. Not because the institution deserved it. Not because Victor Kane deserved it. Because Harold Sims was on a gurney with a fragment 3 millimeters from his pulmonary artery, and Harlan was slowly bleeding in Bay 6, and the work was the work regardless of who was watching or who was paying, or whether the system that employed you was going to treat you with basic fairness. That was the thing she'd understood in Kandahar and had never been able to unlearn. The work does not wait for the conditions to be fair. The conditions are often not fair. You do the work anyway. Not because it will be recognized, not because the institution will reward you, not because the people in charge will see your value, but because the alternative is a world where the patient doesn't make it because the nurse walked away. She had not walked away. She had walked back in, with her plant on the bench and her badge gone, and no guarantee that any of it would matter, because a man was dying and she knew what to do. The highway stretched ahead of her in the fading October light. She thought about what she was going to say to the first group she'd be working with at JOMU, a cohort of civilian nurses being trained for partnership roles with military trauma units. Young, mostly. Some of them would have the things she'd had at that age, the absolute certainty that competence would be seen and rewarded, that doing the right thing was sufficient protection against the wrong outcome. She was going to tell them, it isn't. The system is not designed to see you. It is designed to manage you. Competence is not a shield. Being right does not protect you from the people who need you to be wrong. She was also going to tell them, do it anyway. Document everything. Flag every real concern through every available channel and keep a personal copy. Go outside the institution when the institution closes its doors to you. Find the people who can see what you see and make them your allies before you need them, not after. And when the moment comes, and it will come, it comes for everyone in this work, the moment where it would be easier to walk away. You have to decide what you're made of. Not for the recognition, not for the ceremony or the medal or the people who were wrong about you finally admitting it. For the person on the gurney. That's the whole job. That's always been the whole job. The lights of Ravenport appeared on the horizon, the city materializing out of the early dark the way it always did when she came home to it. Imperfect and familiar, and lit up against the October sky like something that was still, despite everything, worth returning to. She drove home. There would be more work tomorrow. There always was. She was ready.